Okay, good evening, everyone. We are now recording. So welcome to week 4. We're looking at pedagogy and theoretical, oh my goodness, that's not a good start, theoretical influences. So we've explored foundations, reforms, and current trends in the provision of kindergarten. And last week we looked at approaches to curriculum in the early years. So looking specifically at pedagogy and all of those theoretical influences this week before we look at specific approaches to teaching and learning next week. So we've got a little defining pedagogy, pedagogical leaders, pedagogical practices, approaches to curriculum, and then of course we're going to have a bit of discussion and support around our assessment task as well, as we always do, and looking at specific readings as well and how they may have assisted you in your conceptualization. Right, so we've got 16 participants here at the moment. So first of all, we're going to, I just want, I want you to share your thoughts about what pedagogy actually is. And there are no wrong answers here. Pedagogy, or the notion of pedagogy, has a very long and complex history. So it means different things to different people. But in terms of your professional practice or your future professional practice, what does pedagogy mean to you? Tiffany says the art of teaching. Definitely. The art of teaching. Anything else?
It's Warren here. I still got my video off, still having a...
No worries, Warren.
Well, pedagogy, as you said, depends on what teacher. So it's your collective experience of your approach to teaching. Especially, of course, pedagogy is related to childhood teaching as well. I think it's andragogy is the adult version, but now there's a lot of cross definitions of the two now at the moment, I've noticed.
Yeah.
So it's what I've seen is just the collective experience on the way you approach teaching, especially for childhood.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So Zoe says the ways of approaching the content and students. So it's not just about content, it's your interactions as well. Teaching strategies from Katie and Natalie, the way in which we teach. So many of you will already have pedagogical beliefs that you currently base your teaching on. So a summary of effective methods in teaching, different ways of using teaching strategies to interact and the relationships with students. Yeah. So I think as practice, I guess, in the sense of early childhood teaching, it's about the relational values that we have with children and their families, our personal engagement, our decisions about personal engagement. And I think it's also about the learning climate that we create and our understanding of families and educators. So it's about our chosen, and I think it's about our committed practices too. So Pamela says our whole manner and philosophy behind what we do. So I guess if we look at pedagogy in terms of the early years learning framework, pedagogy is defined, as you can see on the slide, as all the deliberate actions and processes that educators organize and implement to translate principles and approaches to curriculum into practice. So those thoughtful and purposeful pedagogical approaches to teaching. So in the case of the early years learning framework, it's about holistic approaches to teaching and learning. So this, of course, as we've broken down in the past, it's about learning through play. So with children actively engaging with people, objects, and representations. It's about scaffolding, so our decisions and actions that build on children's existing knowledge, so their prior knowledge and also their skills as well. So all of those purposeful decisions that we use, the actions to support and enhance their learning. Intentional teaching as well. This is something that keeps coming up constantly. Again, our deliberate, purposeful, and thoughtful decisions and actions. So we also need to consider, so recognize that learning occurs in social contexts. So with interactions and conversations, so that dialogue that we discussed last week. So the conversations are vital for learning. And this runs all the way through the early years learning framework. And finally, cultural competence or respect of multiple ways of knowing. So celebrating the benefits, you say benefits of diversity with an ability to understand and honor differences. Very important in honoring differences. So Warren says that he's pulled from the early years learning framework under glossary, pedagogies, practices that are intended to promote children's learning, pedagogy, early childhood educators, professional practice, especially those aspects that involve building and nurturing relationships. Yeah, so curriculum, decision-making, teaching and learning. So yes, so it is succinct and it is well worded, but I think we need, it's a generalization in a lot of ways, because as I said before, pedagogy is going to mean so many different things to different people. So the early years learning framework, I guess it's essentially a hybrid of traditional and modern pedagogy, pedagogical theories. So it very much acknowledges that different theories about early childhood inform our approaches to children's learning and development, and that early childhood teachers, they draw upon a range of perspectives in their work. So it's never just one perspective, it's a range of perspective. So the early years learning framework, it suggests that these theories might include, so they do state some, but not, they're not specifically involving one or more than one. It's what you actually want to follow. But so developmental theories, so we're looking at Montessori, Gardner, Steiner and Piaget. Sociocultural theorists, so Vygotsky, Bruner and Malaguzzi. We're also looking at social behaviorist theories or theorists, so Pavlov and Skinner, probably the two most important there. Critical theorists, so Habermas and Freire, and then of course, more recently, our post-structuralist theorists, so Foucault and Bourdieu. So, it does, the ELF doesn't specifically or specify which theories or perspectives we should draw upon, but encourages early childhood teachers to draw on a range of perspectives and theories. So theories, I guess, that can challenge traditional ways of seeing children and of teaching and learning as well. So it's suggests that in collaboration with colleagues to investigate and look at theories and to determine why we act in the way that we do, why we make the decisions that we make. the early years learning framework, the principles also encourage us to discuss and to debate theories as well, to identify the strengths of the theories and also the limitations as well. So it challenges us to recognize how the theories and also the beliefs that we use help us to make sense of our work. So it makes sense of our daily practices and to consider the consequences of our actions. I guess in some ways, in that debate and discussion, it's asking us in a way to justify our choices about practice as well. So for your reference, some of the more specific and well-known early childhood pedagogies that you might like to read up on, and of course, look at the seminal research behind them. So we'll go through each of them in turn. Some of them will be more relevant than others to what you're actually looking at in your assessment task. But of course, Wood's pedagogy of play. So this is in relation to understanding the play of children. Wood suggests that we need to consider the influence of the social interactions and also of culture. And I would also extend that to societal stereotypes and norms. So gender, language, and cultural stereotypes. So stereotypes that we often subconsciously impose and mimic in our learning environments. So based on our own understandings and beliefs and values. So we need to be aware of these hidden parts of the curriculum and be purposeful in ensuring that all students' life stories are represented in their opportunities for play. So as we can see on the slide, play can take many forms: dramatic, fantasy, exploratory, manipulative, physical, games and playing with rules, each requiring varied interactions from educators in the learning environment. So we could look at the interactions, I guess, on a continuum as well. So for example, games with rules would involve a lot of interaction with children and a lot of, setting expectations, those sorts of things. Right through to dramatic play, where often children are left to fantasize and create and engage in adventures and to model what they see in their world, to model, to mimic their life story. I'm always absolutely fascinated by dramatic play and fantasy play. There's so much literature around the importance of dramatic play. So Nodding's pedagogy of care. So as early childhood teachers, we're constantly creating respectful and intelligent care partnerships throughout the day. This is something that we really need to think about deeply, because it involves recognizing the importance of all those daily rituals and routines. So things such as hand washing, feeding babies and infants, changing nappies and buttoning up clothes, all of those routines that we do on a daily basis. It's about transforming these mundane tasks into thoughtful and caring educational practices and seeing them as real opportunities, especially when we're working in that birth to two space, when we're our birth to two learners. So things like making eye contact and smiling when we're changing nappies, talking to the babies and infants, singing to them, rather than, so engaging rather than going through the motions. So it's about making those contacts, being in the moment with the children and seeing every moment as a learning opportunity as it is. So Tiffany says routines to rituals. Yeah, very much so. And as we all know, it's so easy to forget about this emphasis on a pedagogy of care in the busyness of our day. Um, it's something that we need to constantly be aware of, and as early childhood educators, to remind each other about it as well. Warren says that he struggles with singing to infants. You could hum, Warren. Humming is also good. Yeah, I know some educators. I work with someone that used to whistle. So, yeah, it's whatever skills you have. It's all about that eye contact and listening carefully and being in the moment with these young people. So Rinaldi's pedagogy of listening goes very much hand in hand with a pedagogy of care. So it has a focus on hearing children. So actively listening to and observing their messages. So valuing their interpretation of the world and noticing their voice and, making sure that children, actually very young children, do have a voice. Even babies can have choices in their learning environment, and as educators we have the power to make those decisions. So he says the amount of focus put on singing to and with the kids in Japanese primary used to make me extremely uncomfortable, but it seems to be a big part of school social community activity here. Yes, very much so. Yeah. Engaging with them, yeah, getting down to their level and playing with them. Very much so, Warren. Yeah. So in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, there was extensive discussion in Italy where Malaguzzi and his colleagues shared their views about the importance of prioritizing the development of high quality and enduring relationships. So the metaphor of education as relationship, it sees the child as powerful. So being rich in resources, competent, and very social. Malaguzzi recognizes that from the beginning of life, the child seeks knowledge of the self and others and the world, and this knowledge is gained through interaction. So this is very much reflected in the early years learning framework, with the acknowledgement of knowledge being co-constructed. So education, therefore, it really is important that the focus is not on the child considered in isolation from others, but instead interconnected with others. So knowledge is very much about being co-constructed. So this extends to the home, early childhood settings, school, the neighbourhood, state, country, and eventually it's about extending out to include knowledge and interactions and understandings about the world. So that really strong emphasis on relationships, which runs all the way through the early years learning framework. So another thing that the early years learning framework really encourages is that everyone who works with young children sees themselves as pedagogical leaders. So the framework, it aims to engage educators, or to encourage them to engage in critical thinking, in reflection, and in inquiry. So it also links, I guess, to encouraging individual professional development for early childhood teachers, linked to carefully determined goals. And of course, across kindergarten, primary and secondary, it's linked to the Australian professional standards as well. So really individualising and carefully basing goals on your specific interests and needs. Gone are the days when everyone would go to the same professional development that the school would have. Now it's very much individually based, thank goodness. Not in all environments, I guess, some depending on leadership, but that is the focus now on the education department. So recapping from last week, the framework is holistic and integrated. So the principles and practices are founded on the beliefs that children are capable and competent. Children actively construct their own learning. Learning is dynamic, complex, and holistic, and that children have agency. Pamela says she loves the image on the slide. I agree, very carefully chosen, my images. The joy on his face is just contagious. So it's very much based on, and which we can see in this image as well, that children have the capacities and the rights to initiate and lead learning, and to be active participants and decision makers in all matters affecting them. And this, it's very important that we extend this to diverse students. Students are, in all abilities, languages, cultures, that they have those opportunities. And as early childhood teachers, that is a very important part of our commitment, I think, to really be looking out for those diverse learners. I'm about to start a research project very soon looking at diverse learners and how early childhood teachers support them across those key learning areas, well, the key learning areas that PISA results relate on, so maths, science, and literacy. So I'm going to be looking for participants in our research project as well in the next year or so. So I may be calling on you. So as we discussed last week, all our curriculum decisions affect each child in some way. So early childhood educators have been found to make over 900 curriculum decisions in a 6-hour day. And in the busyness of the day, not all of these decisions may be made in the best interests of children, but rather as a means of practicality. So, these curriculum decisions that we make will all be influenced by our beliefs, our values, and our prior knowledge as well. So our own world stories. So we need to see ourselves, or we need to ask ourselves some fairly important questions about our beliefs. So where do our beliefs come from? What are our beliefs? And a lot of these are from our childhood. They're from the people around us, our culture. And are there other beliefs and knowledge that would lead us to different decisions in our learning environment? So really reflecting on the impact of our beliefs and values, how they influence what we choose to include in our curriculum and what we don't choose to include. So very, very skillful educators are aware of their beliefs and knowledge, and also the theoretical perspectives underpinning them. So each of us have, well, I certainly do. I think I have specific theories that I guess back up my beliefs and my practices, things that I hold dear to me. So those pedagogical beliefs really do inform our practices. So how and why we make our curriculum decisions, it really helps us to understand why we decide on things like the content for our curriculum, approaches to managing behaviour. So I guess your beliefs about behaviour management, a lot of those are instilled very early, influenced no doubt by what our parents did or didn't do in our childhood, about the theories that we've read about and what we think is important, decisions about how we choose to set up the environment, what resources we choose, particular programs or methods that we rely on a daily basis, and what teaching strategies we use with those individual children. So how we differentiate for individual children or not. And also how we relate to people in the environment, which I guess in a lot of ways is connected to our personalities as well. And how we choose to assess children's learning. That's a big one. So we more into formal testing on checklists, or is it more about observation and formative assessment in our learning environments? So all of these beliefs that we have inform those practices. Educators' actions and words, they also reveal theories about how children learn, understandings about the purpose of early childhood programs, beliefs about children and families. So again, we have that gives us an awful lot of power. They also acknowledge a commitment to children, to their well-being and to their learning outcomes. So this knowledge and confidence, it's going to support early childhood teachers to make informed judgments so that all children experience learning that is engaging and it builds success for life. So I think the early years learning framework, it encourages educators to critically reflect on their teaching strategies, the goals they set, as well as the impact of the decisions that they make. So I think it says very much that our responsibilities are twofold. So firstly, the responsibility to provide children with the best education possible, and secondly, to constantly evaluate the decisions we make regarding the curriculum and our pedagogical choices, and always ask ourselves if these are in the best interests of the children. Pamela says that it's such a fine line, as school may have a certain ethos to which parents subscribe if they choose the school for their children. But does this mean that everyone attending the school will hold exactly the same values? It certainly boils down to being inclusive, and does this sometimes challenge and perhaps even compromise the school leaders and the policy developers? Definitely. What are everyone else's thoughts on Pamela's insight there? I think we all come up against this, yeah?
Yeah, no, well, I'll just speak from my experience. I went to an all-boys Catholic school, so there was a certain strong ethos there. Majority of families and children that attended shared the religious ethos and the upbringing and whatnot. And families that did not share the values and they were in the school either left on their own accord, or they were, well, in those days we could expel. So there was that, I would just say, that control I guess, and the policy and the development to make sure that the school was producing what they wanted to see out in society. Not to say that the education was wrong. I value that type of education, but certainly they were pretty strict and controlling in that factor.
Most definitely. And I guess you also have some schools that are very much focused on results as well. So they don't value children with varied strengths and weaknesses. So there is an emphasis on seeing results at the end and the school having the reputation or continuing to have the reputation. And Tiffany says that the teachers can also be very torn here. And I think, yeah, we don't always have a choice of where we're going to teach, do we? Often it's a matter of trying to fit in, Tiffany, isn't it? You know, we can, I guess to a certain extent, we've got curriculum here and we've got individual schools and the way they implement curriculum, but down the bottom, the very bottom, we've got the early childhood teachers and the students. Now, as an early childhood teacher in a classroom, this is where those pedagogical decisions are made, isn't it? So we do have, I say the word power over and over again because I believe as early childhood teachers or teachers generally in the classroom, in the learning environment, it is finally our choice about what we choose to teach and how we choose to teach it. So I guess that can cause problems in terms of conflicts in the learning environment, but I think we need to advocate for what we believe in. And I think, making choices to do further postgraduate study and to be change agents in our learning environments and to advocate for the things that we want. It's very important. And I think that's, as Kamiko says, it is our choice, but we need to remember the children's rights as well. So everything that we do at the center of it is the, we're looking at the well-being and the learning outcomes of the children. Is that what you're meaning, Kamiko? Yes, yeah. So the children are central to that. But I guess we all have different beliefs in what is best for children as well. Most importantly, though, should be the children, but also the parents as well. What we do in the classroom or in the learning environment, parents really do need to have, be part of that decision making to collaborate in what we do. Okay, so yes, Pamela says, oh, the responsibility that comes with the power. Yes, it can wear us down, can't it? That's why we need to have these communities of practice. We need to share the responsibility, share the power. So critical pedagogy. I think it's, Alicia says, policies and procedures can be important to a leader in the school environment. Therefore, children are required to abide by the rules. Yes. Warren says, do these children's rights become diluted as they enter into school age and have to abide by school routine and expectations? Yes, very good point. Tiffany says it can be hard when parents' expectations don't agree with early childhood education pedagogy. It's very true, Tiffany, and this is where you need to educate parents. That's a big part of being an early childhood teacher. Those early childhood beliefs, we need to keep on discussing them in our learning environments. Sometimes it can be challenging to work with parents, especially in those circumstances, Kamiko, when there are conflicting expectations and beliefs and values. All right, so critical pedagogy, it isn't a prescriptive set of practices like those that we've unpacked previously or so far. it centers on the notion of empowering students and challenging assumptions. Now, critical pedagogy, it's very exciting. So it's encouraging children to move, and I mean young children. It can start very, very early. So encouraging young children to move from transmissive, passive acceptance of information and understandings to actively and critically questioning what they hear and what they see. And this is about 21st century learning. This is educating students to move into the future, to be entrepreneurs, to really reflect critically on the information that they're getting, because as we know, we're getting so much information, and what do we believe? So children of the future really need to actively question what they hear and see. So this pedagogy, it connects learning with the experiences, with the histories and the resources that every student brings to their learning environment. So importantly, it allows children to understand that with knowledge comes power, and the power can enable young people to do something different in their moment in time and to take a positive and a constructive action. So, very much in relation to environmental concerns, social justice issues, those sorts of things. So as a teacher, these critical skills can be encouraged by fostering these progressive ideals. So the fight against racism, sexism, income inequality, and instilling values of social justice. So it's also, I guess, about creating an open and accepting culture in the learning environment. This is a very good place to start for very young children. Warren says that I always ask my kids a critical question when they share a learning experience. For example, I built this robot from Lego. Why did you build a robot? What does it do? I find that their answers are an extension of their experience. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about here. So I think it's important to acknowledge when we are thinking about critical pedagogy, again, to remember and to acknowledge that we do make decisions on what to teach and what to teach, and these decisions are political. We've seen lots of examples of this recently in terms of, I think in the last couple of years, in terms of talking to children about sexuality and at what age and what do we say to them, and about diverse gender interpretation. So there are a lot of people that have differing views about that. It's how the harassment lens. Oh, it's now the harassment lens. What do you mean, Warren?
So yeah, as you were saying, we talk about all the sexual identities, etc. But now the huge one, which is in the news, is about respecting, I can say respecting people and not harassing them. Of course, on the adult level, you get the sexual harassment, but on kids as well, you just get the interference of their own space. It's like, stop harassing them. They've told you. And I'm pretty sure educators have said to children, turn around and tell them, stop, I don't like it. And that's standing up to your ground and saying, please stop harassing me. So yeah, that social issue is now big in the lanes in the public agenda at the moment.
Very much so. And as Fiona says, consent is a really big topic at the moment. And again, these understandings, these values, these beliefs, they start at a very early age, and parents are a huge influence on this. But children spend a huge amount of time at school, so teachers have a huge impact here as well. So we really need to remember that there is an ethical and moral dimension to teaching that needs to be considered in the choices that we make about how we teach and what we teach in our learning environment, about the language we use, about the resources that we choose, about how our environment is laid out, about how we model our interactions with other people. All of those things, every tiny little thing that we do, the children watch so closely, and it really does have a big impact. Does anyone have any examples of this kind of critical pedagogy that they may use in their classrooms now or in the past? So these inquiry-based, or I guess teaching based around that progressive ideal, so such as, fight against racism and
for many years
gender.
when I was in Japan teaching, we
Mhm.
used the IB curriculum, which promotes heavily the inquiry-based critical thinking approach. Granted, I was under the PYP, which is your primary years program, which is the youngest program they offer, but still they encouraged this inquiry thinking and expanding upon it. So 1 year, yes, we all work in the same theme, and of course the questions are appropriate. And then the next year, as the kids get older, the questions get more and more in depth. And of course, IB continues all the way through to diploma program, which is your high school and beyond, where it becomes pretty complicated in the end, and you can really delve down deep into the question that they ask at that age.
Yeah. So it's really seeing children as very competent and encouraging them to think critically.
So yeah, for sure it is. It's
Yeah.
they normally set it up like 3 lines of inquiry for the units or whatever questions the teachers sit together and come up with. But however the children answer those questions, that's the process that you would observe, and that's their learning process. But it's all very individual how they get to those answers.
Okay.
But then they got to try and support them. They can't just go, oh, it's that. But like, how did you get to that idea?
So it's about using a very purposeful series of questions.
Yes, scaffolding is the famous word that they use within their documents.
Very much. Yeah.
Hmm.
Excellent.
I've got
Leisha has shared that she's been running an entrepreneurial program in which the students create a product and sell it. That sounds cool. Did you want to tell us more about that, Leisha?
There we go. Yes, we start in year 9 generally. It's called $20 Boss, or has been called $20 Boss. So the students are given $20, a physical $20, and they have to pay it back through selling their product. So they've got to come up with who their target market is. Very little scaffolding, sorry, Warren, but no, we don't give them, we let them know what marketing is, but we don't scaffold it that much. We think they've seen enough ads to get the general picture. Mm-hmm. And then they work out who they're going to sell their product to, how much it's going to cost them to make it, how much they're going to sell it for, will they make a profit, and then is it going to go to charity or where is it going to go? But they do have to pay the $20 back.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, that's really encouraging them to be independent, and I guess especially without that scaffolding as well, they would really need to I guess do a lot of research as well. I love that. That sounds great.
Yeah, it's been very successful.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure exactly how it's running this year, but yeah, it's been a successful program so far.
Excellent. We've got a really cool one from a comment from Fiona about gender labeling, which is something that I'm very interested in. So, and challenging why things are assumed. So she's used an excellent example here. Are the 3 little pigs boys or girls? That's great. I love that. And Warren says he'd love to see what a 4-year-old does with $20 though. That's an experiment for sure. Yeah. So I guess, it's a good point, Warren, because all of these things that we do with older students, with secondary students, I say, why not encourage younger students to try these things as well? I think we really need to think about, thinking of young children, kindergarten age children, or even younger as competent, and being able to understand these quite sophisticated ideas and scaffolding them to use these ideas and move on with them. So that's very much what critical pedagogy is about. And this image on the slide that you see here with the prep kids up at the fence, it's a clip that I'm going to share with you next week. And it is very much about a teacher who, or a group of teachers who are change agents that really do take on encouraging children to really develop their inquiry and to become change agents in their own right as well.
I saw today, or Angela, I've had a discussion with an educator today, and we were talking about, she's talking about how in Melbourne there's been lots of demonstrations around the environment. So, you know, people, and she was talking to me and she said, oh, there's been lots of demonstrations in Melbourne. I don't really know what they're about. And I thought, wow, like that was sort of for me, that was sort of me thinking, oh, so like our values were quite different. I wanted to know what was happening in Melbourne, and I would have shared that with the children. This is why people are demonstrating. This is what they're demonstrating about, and trying to put it at an age appropriate level. But for her, it wasn't as important as whatever she had decided to do that particular day. So it was kind of just, it's sort of in line with what we were talking about this morning, tonight, that kind of personal pedagogy and your values and how they come through in your everyday teaching. It seems very related to critical pedagogy.
Yes.
Is it important for some teachers to draw children's attention to the political environment?
Well, definitely. And I think that comes down to the ethos of the school as well. So some schools would, have different varying beliefs about that. And, I guess depending on the involvement of the parents as well, what teachers would be allowed to share with students as well. You see some teachers getting into quite a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about early childhood, is we have a lot more scope to run with some of those things, I think, than maybe primary school does.
Yeah, I think ICT is a really interesting area here, because so many parents have different beliefs about the use of ICT in early childhood programs. We're going to get onto that, I think, in week 11, but it's an area that is very big at the moment. There is a lot of research around it. So we'll get to that in week 11. All right, so Fiona and Warren have been talking about encouraging kindy students to raise money for the animals affected by bushfires and send medical supplies, those sorts of things. Yeah, that's very much critical pedagogy. Raising for Easter Children's Hospital visits, the children have a good idea of what it entails. They just need the scaffolding. The kids even knew about COVID-19 during the height of the pandemic and the effects that it was having on their lives. Yeah, there was a lot of discussion around that, and a lot of research around how to talk to children, young children, about what was happening as well. And it also extended to the bushfires, how to talk to children about the bushfires. They hear about disaster and see disaster on television, but for it to actually happen to them, it all comes into trauma counselling and all sorts of things. So, critical pedagogy is can be a very important part of the program. Wrote letters to Koala Hospital telling them not to be sad and to get well soon. That is just so cute. And it all starts with those little, very little small things that actually mean a lot and have a lot of impact. And when we watch this clip next week, you'll see the impact that this particular project, inquiry-based project, had on these school students. All right. So place-based pedagogy. So it describes a pedagogical approach that focuses on the social, the economic and ecological resources of the local community. So it is at its very heart is this notion of a sense of place and the significance of place in shaping children and students' identity. So it really does have specific relevance to rural and Indigenous communities where isolation would lead to a greater need for that community connection and also the cohesiveness. And it also has strong connections to problem-based learning, outdoor and nature-based learning, and sustainability as well. So some of those critical pedagogy things that we were talking about. So it's very closely linked to critical pedagogy because of that focus on democratic approaches, engagement, and community well-being as well. So place-based pedagogy. And of course, I have mentioned this before and we'll go into more depth about it now. So, and I've spoken to a few students via email in terms of how to bring this into their assessment task as well. So this pedagogical framework supports teachers in including Indigenous perspectives. So it's a more holistic approach, so it's utilising Aboriginal learning principles. So in this way, the focus can still remain on core curriculum content, but embedding Aboriginal perspectives in, lots of different learning experiences. So the emphasis is on identifying similarities between Indigenous and more mainstream pedagogies. So I guess we would be thinking about collaborative practice and the focus on being child-centered and student-centered, which runs through more of mainstream pedagogies and also Indigenous pedagogies as well. So in developing the framework, it was contended that Aboriginal perspectives, they don't come from Indigenised content, but from Indigenous processes of learning and knowing. So when I mean Indigenised content, I mean, singing Indigenous songs or having Indigenous artwork around. It's more about processes of learning. So it goes much deeper than that. So an emphasis on narrative-driven learning, land and place-based learning, and that all-important connectedness to community. So I've got some examples on the slide. So I guess we talk about connect and collaborating through shared stories, through storytelling, picturing or visualizing pathways of knowledge. So the use of graphic organizers and things like that, and seeing how knowledge, pathways of knowledge. So thinking, acting, making and sharing without words or beyond words, keeping and sharing knowledge with art and with objects. So using multimodal ways of expressing understandings with art and objects, working with lessons from land and culture. So place-based pedagogies, and putting different ideas together to create new knowledge. So again, going back to those critical pedagogies and inquiry-based learning. Working from wholes to parts, so watching and then doing, so modeling and explicit instruction as well. And also things like bringing new knowledge from home, so sharing knowledge and those caring pedagogies as well. So this is a really good example, I think, of how different pedagogies are interwoven with philosophical considerations, with teaching preferences and also with learning values. So learning values informing and motivating teachers' innovative practice. So I like the symbol as well, the 8 ways symbol, you know, really looking at how all of those ways of learning are interconnected. So more and more schools is 8 ways of learning backed by evidence from the classroom. There is a lot of research that is coming out of this. It's very much based on working with Indigenous elders and encouraging that connection with different ways of knowing and learning from different cultures. But yes, Kamiko, I think if you are interested in looking in terms of research from practice, there is research out there that you would be able to access. Is that what you're talking about? Is that your question? Not there. Warren says, so Ken Robinson writes about this in his book, Creative Schools, about the competency of children, a great read. Oh, I think I've missed the chat flow. He has some great resources also through natural disaster. Okay, sorry, I missed that. I went on. So we're talking about supporting children through natural disaster. Okay, moving on to 8 ways of learning. Are you there, Kamiko? Is that what you were talking about? Are you questioning research in that area? Not there. Okay, but if in terms of curriculum and pedagogy, I think this may be relevant to quite a few of you who are looking at sort of more place-based pedagogies in their assessment task. All right, so as we discussed last week, children and families should experience an environment where authentic links with the family and the wider world are affirmed and also extended. So the early years learning framework defines cultural competence as the ability to understand and communicate with and effectively interact with people across cultures. So it explains that cultural competence is our capacity to be aware of our own worldview, so to acknowledge our own beliefs and values, to develop positive attitudes towards cultural differences, so to accept and to understand and to honour, to gain knowledge of different cultural practices and world's views, so to seek deeper knowledge and understanding. We're not talking about superficial knowledge, we're talking about deeper knowledge and understanding. And to develop skills for communication and interaction across cultures. So to actively listen to perspectives and understand what it means for practice. And we're talking about practice for individual students as well as looking at whole groups, classroom practice and school-wide practices as well. So it's really important that for children to develop an understanding of themselves as significant and respected in order to develop that pride and strength in their own personal and cultural identity. That's something that is very much a part of the early years learning framework. So children needing to know they have a place. So this is where belonging comes in, a place where they feel, as we talked about last week, feel comfortable with the routines, the customs, and you know, the events. And also, I think where they know the limits and boundaries of what acceptable behaviour is. Just checking the chat. Yep. Kamiko, yep, that was what you were thinking about. So One of the things, I guess another example of place-based learning and very much critical pedagogy as well involves the development of a quality early years education for children that includes outdoor activities, so such as exploring natural environments. So the early years framework acknowledges the benefits of these natural environments in improving children's learning, their health, their well-being, their physical development. So to meet these needs, a lot of educators and care services across Australia more recently, so I'd say probably when I say recently, in about the last 5 years, have sought to deliver part of their kindergarten program in the natural environment. So lots of services have taken on this. And so it's been referred to bush kindy, we've got beach kindy, and we've got rainforest kindy, all sorts of things. So these learning experiences expose children to new experiences, self-directed play led by their curiosity, and very much supported by inquiry-based processes or approaches. So they're free to explore, to build, to create, practice new skills, learn new information through this exploration. So it's a emphasis on physical skills and motor development. And I guess there's an element of risky play as well. So it gives, I guess, a bit of a renewed connection and appreciation for the natural environment. So I think the role of educators, of early childhood teachers in this is very much to observe, to learn with, and teach children in the context of the environment. It's largely emergent and I guess importantly child-directed and play-based. They will vary though, the programs, I think, depending on parents' reaction to this, I guess, and to risky play. I know Pamela, is Pamela here tonight? Let me see, Pamela, yes? You there,
Yes,
Pamela?
I'm here. I shared that video about the forest kindergartens in Denmark.
Yeah.
And I think
I've actually uploaded that to Blackboard, Pamela.
Yeah, I saw that. I actually rewatched it again just before because I hadn't gotten to all the readings and I thought, oh, this is only going to take 8 minutes, so I may as well watch it again. And I think
hadn't seen it before. It's fascinating.
Yeah,
It really
I think
is.
that really there were a few like confronting images there for me. The one was the kid like right up at the top of the tree, and then the children that were whittling with the wood and the knives.
Yeah,
and that. And I just went, what? But my first reaction was just, wow, that's really fantastic because they learn like when they're and then the whole concept of a pedagogue. I love that. Like my husband.
Well, this is very much Reggio.
Yeah,
I saw so many parallels.
Pedagogue, and I went, yeah, and then what is it? Somebody who has a degree in human development, is that correct? Like
yes.
Yeah. And I just found it totally fascinating because I thought this is really what we should be doing with our children. They should be out there in the bush. I've seen like C&Ks run the bush kindy programs, and I know how much planning and organization goes into that. And this just seemed kind of a little bit less unstructured in that, like, they didn't seem as hemmed into a certain part of the environment. They seemed to be going, obviously under supervision, loosely, but it's like, but what struck me was when the pedagogue was asked, have you ever had any injuries? And he said the only one they ever had was when a parent drove over a child's foot.
That's
and I thought, wow, with all of that tree climbing and whittling and stomping and climbing and playing with sticks, and it just made me feel sad because I thought I have 2 boys and I'm always saying, put that stick down. But I think also then it's just the context, because if they're running around outside church on a Sunday morning, playing with sticks, that's not the best time. But out in the bush, no worries, go and I think it's about experimentation, isn't it? And they need to be given that opportunity to make mistakes and then learn from that. And if they're not doing that, then yeah, they need to be able to almost discover what the boundaries are in a safe way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but I don't know. I like the reaction of some of the parents. Like one of the mothers said that she just can't watch. She can't be there because
Yeah.
it's too confronting for her to watch her child climb a tree or whittle with a very sharp knife. He looked like he was about 4 or 5.
Oh, the knife thing I think was what really got to me, because I thought, wow.
But if we look at those 2 images,
yes,
Bush Kindy in Australia, look, they're all wearing hats and, and I'm sure there's probably someone's gone in and made lots of noise, no snakes around. They're all wearing boots, and it's probably so many safety checks and checklists and permission forms. To organize something like that in Australia would be quite difficult.
Well, I don't know what the scale is, but in Canada, my family live in Edmonton, and they've actually got, so some of my nieces and nephews have gone to also something similar. It is like a forest school. It's an outdoor school, and we're talking temperatures below -10, and they're out there and they do their thing, and I'm just amazed by it. And it's something that my brother and his wife have sworn by for their children.
Well,
So,
in the clip, it said that 10% of kindergartens in Denmark are now forest kindergartens.
Yeah, that's quite a significant percentage.
Yes. So we've got quite a bit of chat there. Zoe was saying that Kamiko was saying, oh, I've got to go right back. There's lots here. Environment as a third teacher in action. Yeah. Very much cultural orientated. A kid in Scandinavia will learn to ice fish, while an Australian child will wrestle crocodiles. Of course, this is tongue in cheek. Yes, Warren. So field education in China is on the rise. So teachers will take children in nature and farmland to observe the growth of crops and even to plant by themselves. So it's beyond just observation. It's is that correct? Is it more involving getting involved as well? Possibly not to the extent as Denmark.
Like just the observe is the major activities in these education programs.
Yeah, that's excellent. And Kamiko says not everyone has an access to the natural environment. In Tokyo, kids need to swipe an ID card to get into their kindy on the 13th floor. Yeah, the 2 experiences like Denmark and what you're talking about, Kamiko, it's quite astounding, isn't it? And the different, what the different children are learning as well. So teaching kindergarten on the roof of an office building. Yeah. A risk assessment would be incredible, and the paperwork. I know it's frightening. And this is what I think turns a lot of educators off. And also, the parents, the reaction from parents in terms of the risky play. So, I think it's cultural. I don't think we could ever implement something like that here. Would you agree? I don't know. Would you guys, would you let your children go to forest kindergarten once you have a look at it and see, that actually it's much higher than that child. It's much higher than that.
Well, there was when I was still moving around looking for jobs early, there was a forest kindergarten which I interviewed at, and they were rated as excellent against the CEQA, and had been that for their last 2 assessments. And same thing, they're out there with the trees and fallen trunks and all that risky play, as you say. They even had a specialized bush kindy teacher who would go out there and of course teach them and scaffold and whatnot.
Well, a lot of it is to do with the scaffolding, isn't it, Warren? So that's what they did talk about with in the forest kindy in Denmark. So they just didn't give the children knives and say, here you go, have a go, or climb a tree. It was scaffolded, I would imagine.
Well, no, I mean, walked around and gave me a tour of it, and the bush kindy teacher basically said, yes, we teach them to climb trees for sure, but we teach them, you got to look for the thickness of the branch. Will it hold you? You don't just step onto a branch. You actually engage in critical thinking. Well, is this sturdy enough or strong enough or what have you? So yeah, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I grew up in South African bush. That's as dangerous and whatnot, air quotes on that, as Australia. I survived.
Again, it comes down to your beliefs, doesn't it? As we've been talking about before. All very interesting. Thank you so much, Pamela, for sharing that. So I posted the clip about the kindergarten in on Blackboard, so you can have a look at it. Okay. Yeah, there's all sorts of chat about you know, different requirements in terms of risk assessment and what you can and can't do in schools. Yeah. Natalie says that her son would love it, but your anxiety couldn't handle it. I think a lot of mothers would agree with you there, Natalie. Yeah, when I watched the clip, I was quite concerned. You know, my son fell and broke his arm on a trampoline, and he fell, you know, a very small amount, and I was right there next to him. So I guess a lot of people will believe that breaks and bumps and bruises, it's all part of childhood and all part of exploring. But I think it's, you know, for a lot of parents, it's a natural thing to be very concerned about their safety. It's interesting. Climbed enough trees and ran from enough venomous snakes to learn about nature. Excellent. All right, so moving on. So we have talked about this a little bit, and I know we had a conversation about it in the internal session last week, but I think, you know, really talking again about that need to critically reflect and question resource selection and use, and consider the diversity of the community, and to ensure the environment reflects the children and the families' world stories. So if we look, for example, at the common use of animal figurines in early childhood environments. So these are, you know, you see them all the time. They come in a pack with mum, dad, and the 2 kids. So does this really reflect the diversity of families? So single parent families, children with 2 mums or 2 dads. So if you're using these resources, I think it also needs to go hand in hand with discussion about them, or use them as, I guess, provocations to talk to young children about. So from a critical pedagogy perspective in the early years, the learning environment is a primary source of information about diversity and also gender roles and expectations. So I think we would all agree that early years environments are where children pick up cues and understandings of how they're supposed to behave and talk, and what they should be interested in or not interested in, or, you know, where they pick up cues about, for example, whether the 3 little pigs are male or female. That was an excellent example. You know, what as in terms of gender, what they should be interested in and what they're expected to enjoy as well. So in other words, these are places where children's understanding of concepts such as gender actually develop. And early childhood teachers, I guess its responsibility is on them to reflect critically on their perpetuation of gender stereotypes that are often subconsciously reflected in our attitudes, our language that we use, and our teaching methods. Even in the way we choose to dress says something about gender, doesn't it? So yeah, as early childhood teachers, we really need to reflect critically on all of these points. So we've talked a lot about beliefs, and how these beliefs really impact on what we do in our environment. I am going to very briefly share some of my perspectives, and then I'm going to ask a few of you to share some as well. We're limited with time, but you're more than welcome to post things on the chat as well. But my pedagogical beliefs have been developing over many years. I'm sure the same as yours. And as lifelong learners and evaluators, they're going to continue to grow and develop as well. So this development has been influenced by quite a few dimensions. So of course, by my childhood, by the way I was brought up, it would be influenced by my ability and willingness to critically reflect, my collaboration with my colleagues, with the parents and the community, my actual experiences in the context that I've worked in. I've worked across low socioeconomic, very diverse communities and to very high socioeconomic areas where children didn't want for anything. And another thing is also my identity as an educator as well. This has really influenced me because I've always had a very strong focus on early childhood and a strong advocate for early childhood principles and practices. So that's really been a part of my belief. So these dimensions continue to work together to frame and change my beliefs as well. So my pedagogical focus is on the development of inclusive learning environments supported by intentional teaching. So I aspire to encourage children to direct their own learning and through this develop a love of learning and the ability to inquire and the joy of inquiring and finding new information. So of course, I'm very much into emergent curriculums that we discussed last week. So in broader terms, my personal beliefs about the need for cohesive communities of practice and social justice. So these lay the foundation for my socio-cultural perspective. So which is the basis of many current teaching pedagogies. So that value of social and community relationships to create opportunities for supporting learning. So this socio-cultural perspective sees child development as connected to the experiences that they have with their families and as well with their early childhood settings. So it also recognises my belief that learning occurs in diverse social and cultural contexts, and different pedagogies are needed to cater for this diversity. So very much based on those sociocultural perspectives. So what about others? Are there specific theories that are important to you that you can see are connected to your practices? Any thoughts there?
Well, specific theories, I've always fallen back on Howard Gardner's theories of what's it now is 9 multiple intelligences.
Yes, 9 now.
There's 9 now, yes. What is the new one as? Nature, I think it is the newest one he's put in. So I always look at a child in that aspect, and I'm pretty sure by default most educators do. They just don't understand what they're doing at most of the time. But I do see children that they express and they learn about their worlds through their dominant intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's what kind of I try and apply to, or try and apply to my practice.
So very much looking, focusing on children's strengths.
Yeah, very much so. Now, yeah, they have their weaknesses, and we try and improve it when we can, but sometimes it's not even their weakness, it's just they're not interested in it. They just will no matter how you try and, I hate to use this word, but try and force them into that, they'll just outright deny it. And then you can't, you just can't continue along that line. So you got to go with what they understand and what their strengths are so they can understand what they're learning in their world.
Yeah. There's thank you, Warren. Thanks
That's
for
right.
sharing that. There's quite a bit of chat about what have we got? Sorry, I'm just reading through about gender. So I guess the choice of I guess reading through it, a lot of it is about policies in schools and what is accepted. Boys should be brave and should not cry, but girls can. Sexual identity and stereotypes, which is still a big issue in schools. And only recently have they started to allow exceptions for transgender students from the strict hairstyle rules, and sometimes can get uniform exceptions. I know a lot of schools where students are really, boys are wearing girls' uniforms and vice versa as a reaction to this, and, in support of gender diversity. So, so it does vary, but I think schools are becoming a lot more, I think, understanding in some regards. And it's also about language as well, referring, using specific pronouns. So, and these are, very much, I guess some of you may have very specific opinions about this, and this may be a driving force in terms of your beliefs about practice. These might be really important to you. Yeah, so that's interesting, Warren. Yeah, Warren says that it's very different. Some, in terms of celebrities, are accepted in certain ways, but then attitudes are very different. So we've got Jade here, that she's sharing that learning is socially constructed. Yet, so beliefs based on those of Vygotsky. So children learn from each other and through interactions with adults. So sociology theory influences my practice in that I purposely plan the environment and resources to engage children in collaborative learning. To do this, I must first know and understand the social and cultural context, that children come from. So really having those connections to families. So definitely links into critical theory, where I believe in a democratic learning environment where all children's voices are heard and my classroom is organised so all perspectives are valued, not just the dominant culture. I put a lot of time into getting to know the students in my class at the beginning of the year, and also setting up those classroom expectations all together. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that.
Angela, I was just going to give an example. I worked in Mount Isa for a while when I don't know if you remember, there was a big strike in Mount Isa many years ago now. But anyway, so more than half the town is employed by Mount Isa Mines. And when the mine went on strike, majority of people were out of work.
Yeah.
And I was director of the childcare centre. So that you could really see Bronfenbrenner there, because here we were trying to, for the children who could stay, everyone else was just taken out of the service. But then you're dealing with the children, and then they were then affected by, it wasn't something that they had done, it was then what was happening outside of their control. And the parents were under great stress, and the children were under great stress for the children who were still there, because some of them were apprentices and trainees, they still had to go to work. So it really made Bronfenbrenner like come alive for me, if that makes sense. And all that ripple effect of how, because then the whole town became quite, like, if you didn't shop at the right shops, you were supporting one side or the other. Even if you weren't, like, I wasn't involved with the mine, I was the director of the childcare centre.
Oh, but you would see, you were seeing the impact that it had.
Absolutely.
On the children.
Yeah. So you just saw this big thing, and it just really made Bronfenbrenner mean so much more to me after that experience. Yeah,
yeah.
that's not my only theorist that I like, but that just had a big
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah, it really did have a big impact on you. Yeah. Okay. So just looking, because we have discussed quite a lot of these things so far. I think no, we've already discussed that. I wanted to just think about some of our beliefs that we do take into our learning environments. They're influenced by many factors. I'll give you a moment to read through them. Some might influence you more than others, depending on your context and of course, your beliefs and values. And influence may also change depending on your role or your career stage as well. So which are you most influenced by? You can pop them in the chat if you want. Which ones do you think you're most influenced by?
Sorry, Angela, when you say history, personal history or society history?
I think both. I think we can take that as both. So your history or, a society history as well. So our decisions, people have different ideas about history, don't they?
Well, I mean, like until I was 20, I grew up in South Africa, right? So my history was through apartheid, the democratic change, and then of course Mandela and that. So a lot of my history comes from that reconciliation type attitude, which in Australia, it seems to be a struggle. So my personal history based on South African societies is almost forgiveness. Of course, you had Desmond Tutu, had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As I listen to it, it's forgiveness. We can be caring.
Yeah.
Then you can't really shoehorn that type of idea in Australian history at the moment. I know it's slowly progressing to that point, but so my practice is influenced heavily by my history from that country.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Wow. That's why I asked, is it personal or social?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So did you spend a lot of time teaching?
Oh no, I was 20 then, so I was in high school and did all my rebellious youth back in South Africa. Only took up teaching really 2004, but at that time I'd immigrated to Australia and was actually moving to Japan at that time, and that's where I started my teaching career. But it's still, the history stays with me, and those influences stay with me.
Very much so. Zoe has commented that I would say at first teachers are very influenced by the way they were taught, and this is because I'm teaching first years at the moment and in their first professional experience unit, and we talk a lot about the representations of teachers, and they are, a lot of them became teachers because they had an inspirational teacher that influenced them. So that is, and they might have taught in a certain way that really made them think about, how they wanted to teach and why they wanted to teach. It's very interesting. Social change and cultural ideas about children and education also direct the way schools approach teaching and the process of learning. Oh, we're experiencing that now with all of the PISA results that have come out, and the different impact that has had, and different varying opinions on why the results are the way they are, and the representation of diversity in the results. So it's practice, and it changes constantly, beliefs and opinions, and as we've said before, it's very politically driven as well. So my experience with educators, Tiffany says, is that despite their education, professional development, they often fall back to their own experiences of family and education. I think we do that in so many areas of our life. I think those experiences with family are so strong. Kamiko says culture, context, community, life and professional experiences. I try to look for teaching methods backed by evidence. That's a good place to fall back on, Kamiko. Tried and tested teaching practices should be shared more widely so the best practice can be our best practice, but it is very political. Yeah, very good point. Very good point. All right, so I've just got, speaking of theory, I just wanted to go through, because I know a lot of you are doing a lot of reading at the moment, and just wanted to identify some seminal research, and that, because sometimes, especially if you're new to the area, it's really difficult to know or identify them. So I've actually got some images here. It was quite fun looking, searching for these. So I guess these theories, a lot of them are visible in our curriculum documents. And I did ask you to have a look at the theoretical perspectives table that I put on Blackboard. So it was in the guide to the early years learning framework. I just wanted you to familiarize yourself with some of the main perspectives. So along the top, we have Froebel, who believed that children learn through play. Piaget next established a theory of learning where children's development is broken down into a series of stages, so sensory, motor, pre-operational and concrete operation. Piaget theorized that children learn through direct and active interaction with the environment. Then we've got Vygotsky, of course we know, proposed a sociocultural position. Maria Montessori viewed children as a source of knowledge and the educator as a social engineer. Interestingly, I'll just move this out of the way so we can see. Dewey next, he strongly believed that learning should originate from the interests of children, which is foundational to the projects or emergent curriculum approach. Then we've got Steiner, the creator of what is known as the Waldorf education philosophy in schools, so very much focused on spiritual values and social skills. Second row, we have Freire. Paulo Freire espoused the pedagogy of the oppressed, so very much about critical theory. And Erikson developed the socio-social stages of development for children. Malaguzzi, the founder of Reggio Emilia approach that we're going to be looking at in depth next week. So a socio-cultural theorist, he saw children as competent learners and the environment as educator, with documentation very central to making learning visible and valued. Howard Gardner, as Warren mentioned, a focus on multiple intelligences and ways of expressing self. Urie Bronfenbrenner, we've mentioned before, so originator of ecological systems theory. So Donna Berthelsen broke that down in the first worldview clip in this week's activities. Then we've got Michael Foucault, one of the earlier post-structuralists. And then along the bottom row, we've got all of the more recent researchers. So those seminal researchers that were influenced by the earlier researchers at the top there. So Grieshaber, Taguchi, Rinaldi, McNaughton, Pence, Moss, Dalberg, and Sumpsin. So many who have taken on a post-culturalist perspective. So a belief that there are multiple and contested ways of learning. So this means that knowledge is positioned as relative. So there's no absolute truth, but rather there are many truths. And this has become a very popular theory in early years education. So acknowledgement that children have complex and shifting identities, and they move between and participate in different social groups. So basically, these post-structuralists believe that educators need to be responsive and reactive to the different learnings, the context, and the developmental pathways of individual children. So very much the underpinnings of the early years learning framework. And Fiona's actually mentioned, I've missed Marilyn Fleer too. That's a good, thank you for that. And Warren, I'm not even going to respond to that comment. The Dewey Decimal System, I don't know, maybe. All right, so that's just a very quick overview of these theorists. So, you know, a lot of, you know, these people have been so important and so instrumental in theories around early childhood education and care that are the basis of our curriculum at the moment. So on the slide, I've got some questions to finally, and I can sort of the last bit that we're going to do to prompt thinking about the theoretical influences on your practice. I asked you to think about this as your pre-workshop activity. So what theoretical perspectives influence your practice, and how might they influence you? Whose ways of belonging, being, or becoming are valued in these perspectives? So you know, looking more at that, more of the post-structuralist perspectives of those on the lower, you know, that really do reflect a lot of, you know, especially if we're looking at Vygotsky and the sociocultural position. So just, I guess, reflecting on how and what influence these theorists have had on your beliefs, your understandings, and your pedagogical practices. So I really want you to think about this, especially moving into that, you know, that final part of your assessment task where you're going to be looking at implementations for future practice, and I guess where you will be thinking about being a change agent. And you know, these theorists that have really influenced what direction you want to take. Anyone want to share if there are a particular theorist or theories?
Well, I've been looking at mostly modern now, like I can't pronounce the name of it, like Waniganaka and Sims.
Mm-hmm.
And they look at it through a neoliberal lens, basically, to seeing how the ELF has been, I guess, manipulated to appease a lot of political views.
Mm-hmm.
And how, these theories are all good and to go through, but in the modern day, that they kind of are forced or influenced by a lot of things that these theorists never would have thought of.
No, definitely.
Yeah, so that's those are the two I'm looking at. I mean, I've got papers here. There's a paper by I've lost it. Sims, Waikanaka, and I've lost the name. Sorry, there's a third publisher, a third author as well in one of the papers, which actually bring up a lot about the neoliberal influence, and also the Nice Ladies, which is a famous paper as well. That seems to prop up quite a few times that I go through my research.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a lot of political influence over these theoretical influences that I've noticed.
Oh, very much so. And Kamiko's pointed that out too in her comment. Yeah. Right. So I think it's getting a little bit too late in the evening to be thinking about all of these theorists. Would you agree? So I guess one of the things that I wanted, as I said, that I wanted you to think about is how does this relate to your research question and what you're going to be doing in your assessment task. So I guess finishing up, aligning your pedagogical beliefs and understandings with curriculum and assessment requirements is, it's a matter of identifying these 3 essential factors. What learning is valued, based on the curriculum framework, on the context and children's interests and needs, how teachers can best teach and hence children learn, and what sort of assessment will enable us to know children's prior knowledge and what they have learned and what to base learning on in the future. So very much, looking at those 3 areas there. So curriculum, pedagogy and assessment, and how we align those for the benefit of children and students. All right, so by now you should have your assessment task issue fully conceptualized and well on your way to review the literature in the area. So in terms of timeframes, what are we in, week 4 now? I think conceptualization, you need to tick that off because it's an area you need to be moving on. A lot of you seem to be chopping and changing, and I think it's time to actually make your decision and start really looking in depth at that literature and starting your writing. If you are still having issues, might I suggest possibly looking at one of the suggestions on the task sheet and just locking into one. If you feel like you're really overthinking things and having trouble fixing on one particular focus, that might be the way to go. Any questions at all about the assessment task? I think you're all feeling quite comfortable emailing me and asking me questions directly. But is possibly if you have something general that you wanted to ask before we finish up. No thoughts. What time have we got? We're at 8:13.
Angela.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Yifang. Yeah, and I just asked the librarian about the corrections that the literatures from translate from Chinese to English. Yeah, I sent the literatures to a librarian and she said that she can't find this in English version, but the DOI links, if they can, you can search on Google's, but yeah, but one of these DOIs work, but another doesn't work. So, and the librarian also find the APA blogs. They said it's okay to translate the foreigner resources from the Chinese to English. Yeah, she said it's so. Yeah, she says okay.
Okay. All right.
Using Google Translate. Yeah.
Okay. All right. No, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, I thought there'd be a solution. Excellent. So you may, it's probably not just you that is in this situation. So those of you that are listening to the recording that are also looking at documents from home, from your home country that you wanted to use, you may want to look at Google Translate for that. But make sure you do talk to the library about it as well, just to see if they can support you in that in some way. Pamela, yes, I agree. I think my first Zoom was at 1 and then I had another one and this is my final one. I haven't had dinner yet. You get to that point where you kind of don't want to eat after a while. I am looking forward to my Aperol Spritz though. That's been keeping me going. Okay. Anything else before we say good night? Nope. Okay, well, thank you everyone for all of your amazing insights and discussions. As always, have a lovely week and please keep safe, those of you who are in Brisbane or in New South Wales as well, with the rain. Drive carefully if you're in your car. Okay, everyone, have a great night and I'll talk to you next week.